when you heard the news? What were you thinking, and how did you hear the news?
I heard the news from through a text from a friend who knew that I had clerked for Justice Ginsburg and was close to her in various ways. And so a friend was sending her personal sympathies, but I hadn't heard the news yet. It had only broken 20 minutes earlier, but I immediately turned to the news stations. And I mean, I was so sad for her family, for our country. I was really flooded with memories. It's hard to believe that I had known her for more than 40 years, going back to when I was a law student. And so there were just so many memories that came to mind.
And I did not realize that when we were being set up to speak that you had clerked for her.
I clerked for her during her very first year on the District of Columbia circuit. I met her when I was a law student. I was a student at Columbia Law School in the late 70s, and she was one of the few tenured women law professors in the country, the only one at Columbia at that time. There were one or two more junior women, but she was the only woman I ever had a law school class with in the 1970s. And I took, believe it or not, her constitutional law class, which was amazing. She was arguing these cases before the US Supreme Court and also teaching constitutional law to us.
Wow.
During my, as I graduated from law school was when she was nominated to the DC Circuit by President Carter, and she asked me to clerk for her, which was a very special experience. It would have been under any circumstances, but the first year in any judicial chambers is really special because the judge was learning the ropes, and we were there to experience that along with her. So that was really incredible.
How would you describe her as a person? Because you know her much more than the rest of us who are sort of mourning her loss from the outside looking in. It sounds like a long time you were on the inside looking out. You knew exactly what she was like behind the scenes before she gained the popularity that she later did.
Yeah, a little bit anyway. There's so many facets to her as there are to anyone. She's certainly somebody who is serious and very serious about the law. It's extraordinary how long she can talk about a single federal regulation or statute or a favorite constitutional provision. I've been at cocktail parties with her where she will get totally engrossed in discussing some provision of law. She's passionate about equality and about change and about protecting people who are disadvantaged in our society. That was runs through all of her work way back to before I knew her. She had done in her early years as a professor. She had a lighthearted side. She definitely could giggle for quite a long period of time when her fancy was tickled. She loved beautiful clothing, and she was very elegant. I once had the great experience. We were at a resort where there was a judicial conference that she was attending, and she had invited me. And my husband and I wandered into the gift shop or dress shop at the resort. Totally things I could never afford. I was still a very junior professional. And there she was. And she was looking at some clothing, and she asked me for my opinion on a particular piece. And I told her it was beautiful. And she said, well, it's expensive. And I said, yeah, but you might regret later that you don't have it. And later at dinner, her husband said, I understand I owe you a debt of ingratitude. So she also, another memory from that particular time is that she invited my husband and me to go horseback riding with her. And we discovered that she rode English style, including with a full English horseback riding habit, side saddle. We, of course, were not nearly as elegant. Somehow the horse barn found some very slow and steady steeds for me and my husband to ride, but she wanted to, canter and gallop, and she was a woman back in those days.
When is the last time that you were able to communicate with her or had any sort of exchange with her?
I sent her a note during the summer. I exchanged notes with her over the years and also have seen her in many times. And I sent her a note I think it must have been in July, and received a note back from her. And it was clear from her note that both that she was upbeat, but also that clearly the cancer was playing a role in her life. She mentioned in the note how happy she was that her family members were taking turns staying with her. She, as you know, lost her dear husband, Marty, 10 years ago. And, but both of her grown children, Jane and Jim, were spending time with her, as was at least one of her grandchildren. And so I'm glad that she was well cared for. And I was very glad when I read in the paper that she had died at home with her family, because I think that would have had great meaning for her.
What do you think her biggest legacy will be on the justice system and law in general, and just the way that she led her life?
Well, the biggest legacy is probably the impact she had for me, for you, and for women all over this country and even all over the world. It, when I was in junior high school, many women I knew of who were lawyers or scientists or many other types of professional roles blazed the way for us and made it clear that it was possible to be that type of woman. At the same time, she was also very committed that women and men should do what they wanted to do. That she has had clerks, women clerks, who have decided not to practice law, who have stayed home to raise their families, and she was every bit as supportive of that. My husband is a bit like her husband was. They're both terrific cooks. She knew that I, like her, hated to cook and couldn't be trusted to do it, and that the men in our families were much better at it. So she was very, I remember back in the early 80s, she would sometimes recite a children's book, Free to Be You and Me. And that was very much, I think, her motto, that society should nurture all of us. And that extended, too, to the ways in which I think her work reached out to people of color, people with different sexual orientations. She and her even before I had her as a professor, she was a co-author on a brief for the American Civil Liberties Union that was strongly defending affirmative action programs. She was very dedicated to equality and advancing all peoples. She took tremendous delight in the last few years in performing same-sex marriages. And I know she felt, again, that was an expression of her feeling that we should all have the ability to live our lives fully in whatever way we were. So I think that's probably her greatest legacy, just in terms of the number of people and lives touched. But there's certainly an equally important legacy in terms of her role as a justice and how she would formulate the law. She was very, very careful in her decision-making, very thoughtful. She would follow the law where it led, when sometimes contrary to where she might have taken it. I remember an opinion years ago that she wrote that was criticized by many feminists, and she was very hurt by that. But she was right on the law, and in fact, it was an opinion that actually supported women's rights and interests. And I think her collegiality is, I think, remarkable. And the fact that she was such close friends with Justice Scalia, all of the statements from the Supreme Court today spoken about how civil and collegial she was and how important she was to that feeling. I know that she felt strongly about that on the Supreme Court. During her first years on the Supreme Court, she would speak with great affection of Chief Justice Rehnquist. She called him, my chief, and would express her great, affection for him in the court. So I think it's going to take us time, really, to digest her legal contributions, because the Supreme Court decides cases in so many areas. It's hard to even get a grasp on all that she's done. We know about Virginia Military Institute and the way that she opened the doors there for women. But once we have time to go back and look at her opinions on tax and copyright and the Fourth Amendment and everything else that the Supreme Court handles, I think we'll have a sense of what a terribly great loss we've suffered.
Now that we have that loss, the focus is now turning, as you well know, to her replacement. And it sounds like, based upon what I've read from her statement through her family, she was well aware at how important replacing her would be. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it certainly is important. And I feel sad for her personally that as she was doing this terrible battle with cancer, and one that she'd waged for much more than 10 years, it may be going on 20 years from when she first had cancer, that in all that pain and illness, she had to be worried about the nation and the court. I just hate to think about that, and that's why I know she was at home, and I'm glad hope she was comfortable with family. So for me personally, I can hardly bear to think about that this weekend. I feel like it's such a great loss, to me, I don't have the greatest loss personally, that's to her family and to others who were closer to her than I was, but she touched many, many people, so there's a lot of personal loss. And it's a great loss to us as a nation. I think everybody is recognizing that, whatever side of the aisle they'll be on in the next appointment. So I really have wanted to just take these few days to honor her and to think about her, and then see where things go.
Were there any other thoughts you want to share as you were thinking about knowing that we would be speaking about her tonight?
Oh, I could tell you so many other memories.
Oh, hey, I'd love to hear some.
I got married at the end of the year, my year clerking with her, and she threw an amazing old-fashioned surprise bridal shower for me. She kept it a complete surprise. My husband was in on it, but he didn't let on either. She contacted my mother and sister who lived in other parts of the country, and they flew in secretly. The guests at the shower were her and the other woman judge on the court at that time, and all of the women who were clerks on that court. There were only two men at the shower. One was her husband, who was the chef, and cooked us a marvelous meal. And the other was her son, her teenage son, who served the meal to all of the women guests. And it was such an amazing combination of the old and new. Right? I mean, she even had an umbrella that the gifts were stacked under, this old-fashioned, real women's bridal shower, but that the guests were these professional women, the two women on the meals and the clerks there. So that's a really treasured memory.